Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the June 24th Westwood School Building Committee and Westwood Permanent Building Committee meeting. I'm going to start with a roll call attendance of the School Building Committee. Ken Aries.
Here.
Josh Baumer.
Here.
Brian Baer.
Here.
Chris Coleman.
Here.
Lyle Coughlin.
Here.
John Cummings.
Here.
Jen Flanders.
Here.
Rob Gotti.
Here.
Nancy Hyde.
Here.
Matt Kuklins.
Here.
Michelle Miller.
Here.
Emily Parks.
Here.
Chief Scoble. Oh, Chief, we didn't hear you.
Yes, I am here.
Oh, there we go. Perfect. Thank you. And I am here as well. John, do you want to do your PBC call?
Absolutely. Ken Aries,
Here.
Brian Baer,
Here.
Lyle,
Here.
Nancy,
Here.
Emily,
Here.
Maya,
Here.
and Chief. God bless you. And I'm here as well. So we are all in attendance.
Great. Thanks, John. I'd like to recognize the live stream available online at www.westwood.k12.ma.us/live to provide real-time public access to the activities of the school building and permanent building committees in accordance with an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency. This meeting is also being recorded for later broadcast on Westwood Media Center's platforms. So there's a chair's report project update, but I believe that Doran Whittier or Compass is presenting that. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes, Mayor, we were going to talk to that.
Okay. So I will turn it over to you.
Sure. Good morning, everyone.
All right.
We don't have much to talk about today, so this will probably be quick. I'm kidding. I'm going to share just a quick slide and then we'll get into a bigger presentation or a bigger discussion. Give me 1 second. To catch everyone up to speed, I'm not sure where you all are at as far as understanding of how the bids came in. So we received file sub bids about 2 weeks ago. Those are the trades like painters, flooring, mechanical, electrical, plumbing. They were approximately $2.9 million over budget without alternates. So we were hoping that GC bids would come in and potentially improve that scenario. Sometimes that happens. Worst case, the GCs would not make the delta worse. The GCs, we had 4 that were pre-qualified. We received 3 bids from Bray Builders, Bacon Construction, and Fontaine Brothers. The GC bids were within about $700,000 of budget, so obviously they've increased that delta slightly. So we got 3 bids. Bray Builders was the low base bid of $73,900,000. That does not include any of the alternates. You can see the alternate pricing from left to right. The budget cost for construction for including all alternates was $70,380,360, so roughly $3.6 million over budget. The planned bid buffer that we had talked about back in May included, obviously trying to reduce the cost of construction by carving out some of those alternates, as well as identifying some potential soft cost / contingency reductions that could potentially, absorb a higher bid number. We still have some of those soft cost reductions to discuss that can absorb some of that overage, but at the end of the day, we're still going to be over budget. Couple options moving forward, just so everyone understands, a decision or an award by Mass General Law is required within 30 business days, so roughly 45 calendar days, one way or the other. You need to either award the contract or make a decision to do something else. What are the options at this point? And go through these quickly. We can discuss some of them, but I think we're going to talk about the last one. Obviously, secure more funding and cover the gap and move forward. There's questions on the timing, obviously where you get those funds, when those funds will be needed. We could adjust the budget, award the contract With no additional funding, there isn't a scenario that we'll show shortly. That means no alternates, reduce your contingency to like 3%, have zero money for FF&E, and try to either reuse existing furniture and fund it out of whatever's left over in contingency. That's really the only path forward without additional funding. You could rebid the project. You're over budget. You'd have to rebid the whole thing. Some risks associated with that. We only had 3 general contractor bids. There are other school bids that will be opening between now and when we'd be able to rebid this. Potential to lose one of those contractors. No guarantee that you're going to save money on that. There are some, obviously people know what numbers were, so there's a chance that, costs could also go up. Market's still going up. You could delay the project, rebid it later. Hopefully catch a better market. Who knows what the economy is doing? Maybe there's somewhat of a recession and there's better pricing. The timing of that is always a risk. No guaranteed you're going to get a better price. Cost of labor still goes up. Could see higher costs. You still could lose the bidders like we talked about. And then there's a question of MSBA's involvement. If you delay it, a certain amount of time, will they actually not be able to support that? So we could redesign, rebid it quickly. And obviously there's issues with that, with the time involved, designer fees, loss of bidders, would the MSBA still support that? Cancel the project is an option, which potentially is probably not an option at all. Obviously, the town has gone down this road for several years. You'd have to restart the MSBA process. You'd have all the sunk costs that you spent to date. And then finally, a combination of securing additional funding and budget adjustments, which is what we're going to talk about today. Any questions before I get into those? I think we have an update regarding potential additional funding sources, but we're going to go through a couple options.
So Brian, it sounds to me like you're saying eliminate the first 6 options and let's focus on 7. Is that what's being suggested?
I think the recommendation is going to be there's going to be some combination of securing additional funding and then making some budget adjustments. We have enough money in the budget, so to speak, to award a contract. The issue is that you then have a reduced contingency. You also have to figure out how you're funding things towards the end of the project, like owner provided items, FF&E, et cetera. So that becomes a risk. So I think there's going to be some combination of additional funding / reduction in contingency or something of that nature. And that's what we want to talk through today. So yes, the recommendation would be to move forward with the number 7, which is a combination of additional funding and some budget adjustments.
Hey, Brian, I just want to, the number I have that we're over is 4,617,000. Is it delta? Because if you take the difference between the contract 7380, 73.9, which doesn't include any of the alternates, which was in the original 70.38, that comes to 4617, 4.617.
Yeah, so that's including I think that's staying with what a $5 million or 5% contingency, John.
Yes, so apples to apples, if you take the estimate that we had, which was 70.38, and the bid came in at 73.9, not including any of the alternates.
Yeah.
So when I add in that delta of that is 3.51, when I add in the just over 1 million for all the alternates combined, I come up with 4.617. I just want to make sure that I'm not way off and there's something I'm missing.
Yeah, I don't have that in front of me. I can double check that, but I'm going to take your word for that.
Okay.
Brian, I just had a quick question. Chen, thanks for sending over the file subs. Nice, what was the issue there? There's a $2 million spread between them and Griffin, but they withdrew.
Yeah, they withdrew. They submitted documentation that they had a calculation error in their estimate. About $1.6 million was what it was. So they were still, they still would have been low bid, but they were over budget as well, and they withdrew.
Were there any other issues on the file subs that drove up the GC price?
On the filed subs that drove up the GC price,
Yeah.
not that we're aware of. As I mentioned, the filed subs were approximately 2.9 over kind of what the estimate filed sub costs were. And then the GCs came in about 700,000 over.
Like B&G and Spillane, they had some issues with their DCAM cert. Were they accepted as bids or rejected?
Their DCAM cert, we looked that up and they had a valid DCAM cert.
So they were accepted and the GCs were able to carry them?
Yes.
Brian, I don't know if it's worth noting the specific areas in the filed subbids where really the bulk of the overruns came in, which were mostly roofer, mechanical, and electrical.
Correct.
Those three alone amounted to roughly 2.6 million.
Yeah, I think electrical is almost $1 million in itself.
Yeah, it's too bad we only had the one bid.
Yeah, we had pre-qualified, I believe, 4 electricians total and received
which
2 bids. One was withdrawn.
Are there any BE ideas that have been kicked around?
We had gone, I think the project had gone through a lot of VE prior to bid documents, and I think we got it down to a list that the district and the building committee had felt were kind of, this is everything that they could do without significantly impacting either the intent of the building or the programming. I don't know if Emily and Maya would want to speak to that more.
I mean, in light
There
of
are
the-
options.
in light of
Yeah.
the bid results, I'm just curious if that's something that should be revisited.
But I think to your point, Lyle, we are looking, we've already started a list of items to be looking at as potential ways to provide a credit proposal request on day one. So we are developing that list right now.
I think that's going to be in parallel to whatever decision the committee makes to move forward with the project. So obviously we won't have hard numbers on any type of VE credit realizations until we actually start the project and can get some of that pricing back. But that would be the intent, is to do that in parallel with whatever the solution is, to hopefully accumulate some credits that would obviously go back in and either supplement the contingency fund if we start with a reduced contingency amount, or supplement soft costs like FF&E.
With
Does
the,
that list have just an estimate, or, I don't know if Rob, you're putting numbers to it, or Brian, something that.
Yeah, I think we have general order of magnitudes, but that's pretty preliminary at this point. I think that's something we're just looking into to see exactly what, obviously if you're changing a material or assembly or something like that, they kind of need to flesh that all out first before we can put a better estimate to it. But I think, the goal would be that we could somehow, discover, a couple $100,000 here or there in total, without really getting into programming or major aesthetics of the building. I don't know, Rob, if you want to add anything to that.
No, I mean, we'll try to have a general sense, in looking at our previous cost estimates, and we'll have a general sense of where we think these items should come in at. And we'll have to see how that shakes out.
Brian, looks like you have a hand up.
with the 3 sub trades that you mentioned, Rob, did we get down to the detail of, or was there anything, were there things specific in the electrical, mechanical, and roofing that were driving up the cost, or was it just in general high costs?
In speaking with our cost estimator, these are the areas that they have been seeing consistently among other projects that have been coming in. One of the downsides with the electrical is, as you mentioned, we only had 2 bidders, and one of them dropped out. So that lack of sort of competition is unfortunate. And the mechanical was all over the place. The other two bidders were each about $1.5 million to $2 million apart from each other. One little insight that we received is that when we received the clarification from the roofer, they were carrying a significant amount of escalation in their calculations. Really significant. And so what that told us is that there's a lot of uncertainty in the market right now. A lot of people kind of hedging their bets, not knowing where the future prices are going to go in the coming years. And that's what our cost estimator had mentioned as well.
Yeah, so just to clarify, Rob, we actually had a not the low roofer, I think it was second or third roofer, withdraw their bid for a similar reason, that they had miscalculated. They sent in the backup, and they had a line item, I think it was $400,000, just $400,000 for escalated costs. So they had their own contingency baked in there. And just to clarify, Brian, we don't see the breakdown of the bids, we just see the number. So unless they have a reason to withdraw and they have to support that, we don't see what's actually in their bids. But what Rod just said, obviously, is there'd be an assumption that a lot of the trades have padding in their bids, so to speak, as much as they think they could put in and still be competitive.
Is there an option to pre-buy some of these things, and even well before they're needed, to avoid the risk of escalation?
Yeah, one of our goals is, if we move forward, is to get a lot of these long lead, kind of risky products like roofing, like mechanical equipment, the generator, et cetera, submitted, approved, and released as soon as possible to lock that in.
Does pre-buy-in affect any warranty issues if you buy it ahead of time? No.
No, typically the warranties don't start until it's installed. And again, it's a matter of locking in the pricing and getting the order in the queue versus waiting maybe more traditionally when you would have procured it.
Okay.
I want to clarify one thing is that for that to move forward, that we may or may not see the owner side may or may not see the reduction in cost in terms of whether the contractor will share the saving with the they contractually they do not have the obligation.
Is there additional cost associated with having some facility to store any pre-bought materials that's not accounted for?
If you from that perspective is that if we need to say rent a warehouse to store the material, that cost is not in this number that we're discussing today.
Typically, the subs have facilities to store it, and
that's going to be the sub's responsibility to deal with that.
Yeah, typically they would store it in their own facility. We see this on projects kind of regardless of the market. They would get it in advance, they store it, and then they would have to provide proper documentation, et cetera, if they wanted to get paid for stored materials. We have those processes in the contract.
The point of clarification too, unless specs have changed, the warranties wouldn't start until the building's turned over and accepted.
That's right.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct, Lyle. That's correct. So installed and the building is accepted, that would be the start of warranty, is correct.
All right, so Brian, I just want to put you back on focus to the scenarios that you have in hand.
Sure. So this spreadsheet, I believe, just got circulated this morning. This is something that we had, we're working through once the bid numbers came in with John and Maya and Emily to kind of get a sense of where we are. And just to give you a quick overview, and we'll kind of focus down at the bottom. The budget for the project is the column to the left here, the column in white. the items that are highlighted throughout the budget are other soft costs that basically we have not committed to date. We have available funds that we feel, either the committed amount is less than what the budget is, and we're carrying the lower amount, or we feel that we're not going to spend that budget line item and we have a projected amount in there to pick up some of the savings. So an example there is some of the soft costs or commitments for the OPM are a little bit lower. The permitting, we're through permitting, and what we feel we have left to pay on the project is lower than that. So we're carrying a much lower amount. So we picked up as many soft costs as we can accumulate. We plugged in, this is the construction cost that we were carrying in the budget. We plugged in the base bid of 73.9. And all these columns represent a different scenario with construction contingency, which would be used for change orders, not owner's contingency for soft costs. We've also reduced some of the miscellaneous costs. Now that we know final numbers on utility, we have final quotes on testing requirements. So we're able to pick up some soft costs there. FF&E and technology. So per the last update to the committee in May, 178,000 of the technology budget was reduced or made available because the district is able to procure some of those items through their current capital plans. And then for this scenario, we had zeroed out the FF&E budget to begin with, and then we'll talk through that in a minute of how that comes back into play. So when you do all of those calculations, you come up, here's a total project budget before contingencies. And then when you add in the percentages of contingencies, we carried 5% in the total project budget. So our total project budget with the MSBA is 87,820,000. These scenarios of adjusting contingency shows you with the bid results and no alternates show you where the budget ends up. And then what you're chasing as far as a delta. This green item includes, if you were to include alternates 1 and 2 in these scenarios, which is the UV and the canopy in front of the school. These are the costs that came in Brate's bid for alternates 1 and 2. This line item is if you want to reinstate an FF&E budget, how much additional funding would you need? So you end up chasing 3.4 million. And as talked about back in May, the town has agreed to put in the balance from the feasibility study into this project, into the construction phase. So you have some additional funding coming there. Obviously, it's at a different timeline because I believe it requires a town meeting. And we have additional monies from the incentive with Eversource coming in at some point during construction. So you do have some additional funding coming in that we had accounted for in May, which really puts the delta at about 3 million if you carry a 5% contingency. And if you reduce contingency, the delta goes down accordingly. And this option is what we had talked about on the previous slide. If you carry a 3% contingency, have 0 in the FF&E budget, do not carry any alternates, you get within 190,000 of or 200,000 of budget. So there's potentially some other tweaks that could keep you on budget, but you're running with a 3% contingency and no furniture budget.
I've got to ask you, I'm sorry to interrupt you. You're moving along so nicely, but back where you got to the total project budget line, my ears weren't hearing fast enough to compare the first column to the second on how you explained the 87.8 to the 89.8. And I'm just sorry, not having been able to look at this before the meeting. I need you to go back and then pick up from there again, please.
Okay, yeah, so the 87.8 was the budget that we're carrying. The 89, so in the first scenario, keeping a 5% contingency, putting in the bid number of 79,300,000 and scrolling that all the way and reducing FF&E to 0, you're at 89,839,000. And then as you reduce contingency 4.5% or 4% or 3.5%, you're obviously reducing that total project budget slightly and you're reducing your delta.
Can you explain the logic there between taking, well, maybe you're going to get to it and tell me if you are, because you said something about FF&E coming back later, but why this column is bids with alternate 1 and 2? Because that's what the headline is at the top. But you're taking out FF&E. So, you know, forgive me for, again, for interrupting, but you guys have been looking at this for 3 days? and you're just presenting to us now, so you're skipping over some fundamental assumptions here. Or, I don't know. Is anybody else having trouble, or is it just me? Okay, it's just me. Keep going.
No, it's not, Nancy. So I've been looking at it for a day.
Not
It's gonna
just
take me a day.
It's a lot of information, new information.
Let me just say the base. So what helped me was the base project, right? That's the number from the estimator, and that's the number we were going off of, let's say in April.
Yeah,
So the total project cost was 83,601. The total cost of the construction at that time was 70.34
Yep, 7380.
And with the increase, so that's the white column on the left. With the increase from 70.34 up to 73.9.
Yep.
That bumps, so that you see right there is the construction budget, but that bumps up the total cost of the project. And they
so-
realized the soft cost that they saved, and that's the total cost of the project right there is 85.644.
Yeah, so the construction cost is roughly $3.6 million over what we were carrying for construction costs in the budget, but some of the soft cost actualizations up above that we can actually take, because we're not going to spend that money, has offset that slightly. One of the scenarios that we
So
were
basically
discussing.
the savings from getting the hard numbers are
Correct.
illustrated in that kind of orange color. And that
Yep.
when you take that delta out, that drops us down to 85.644.
Right, and we zeroed out the FF&E in these scenarios, simply because when we were talking through it, that's obviously funding that you need a little bit later in the project. So I think we were trying to get to a point of what would we need to start the project, and what would we need to account for by the end of the project, whether that was putting back in the FF&E money or supplementing the contingency to get back closer to 5% if we could not find additional funding to cover the total project budget plus a 5% construction contingency. So we started to work through those scenarios at the bottom. So this is the total cost of the project, 89,839,000 with a 5% contingency, 0 in FF&E, and no alternates, just the base cost of 73,900,000. In discussions with John, May, and Emily, the discussion point was, alternates 1 and 2. The feeling is that they're critical to the project, and then obviously the desire would be to have an FF&E budget and not reuse old furniture. So we're saying, okay, well, let's reestablish the FF&E budget. What would you need for additional funding? 3.4 million. We have about 340,000 of additional funding that will be coming in that we know about at some point during the project, just not on day one. So you really need to have about 3,079,000 of additional funding to fund a full FF&E budget, accept bid alternates 1 and 2, and have a 5% contingency. So call it 3.1 million is kind of what you need to fully fund the project as the budget was set up originally. And then the other scenarios to the right are basically if you reduce contingency by 0.5 percentage point, not affecting the cost of construction or not affecting your FF&E budget because it's carrying FF&E all the way through, basically reducing contingency, how much funding would you need to then cover the full project budget? And obviously, as you drop a 0.5 percentage point, it's roughly a couple 100,000, about 400,000, 350,000 at 0.5 percentage point. So you really get down to around 3.5% contingency, which, if you get additional $2 million in funding, which is a number from the district's mitigation fund, this scenario, 3.5% contingency with alternates 1 and 2, a full FF&E budget gets you down to 29,000 within budget.
Yeah, and if I can just speak to the district mitigation money, just to give some background, as many people, particularly on this call, know, the district received around $2 million in mitigation money from the University Station Development Project. which was given to offset any impact that higher enrollment, higher than anticipated or estimated, would, it would mitigate that factor. The numbers of students, the impact of students on the schools from university actually was at or below the estimated. So those funds did not have to be used. We had a school committee meeting last night where we discussed the district mitigation money and the fact that we have sort of steadfastly held on to it for a rainy day. There have been other suggested uses for those monies in the past, particularly during COVID. We were able to get through COVID without using them. And the school committee did not vote last night to use the money because it was, it's $2 million. And the first we were discussing it was last night, but all members of the school committee did indicate that they would be willing to consider allocating the full amount of the mitigation money toward this project, given that we really are, so this really honestly was worst case scenario for the bids coming in on Wednesday. This is the rainy day, I think, that the district has been holding on for. The town has invested so much into this project already. And so the school committee indicated last night pretty much unanimously that they would be willing to use these funds for this purpose, which is why Compass has incorporated this line item into the spreadsheet.
Can you also remind us what the two alternates are?
Yep, the first alternate is the UV system for the HVAC. And the second alternate is the canopy that leads from the parking lot up to the front door. We felt that these were critical, and we can certainly discuss them, but we felt they were critical. The UV, first just coming out of the pandemic, I think in order to get that HVAC system working the way that we had wanted it to work in terms of filtration, the UV system is critical. And we also feel the canopy is critical, not just from an aesthetics perspective, which of course it is. It really does tie the building together and really sort of address the issue of the mass of the gym, but more importantly, from a functional perspective, particularly when it comes to accessibility. We really feel that it's important to have that covered walkway leading. It's a fairly long walk from the parking lot up to the front door. There were, I think if you recall, there were discussions about whether or not the canopy should even be an alternate given its function, but ultimately the SBC decided to include it as an alternate. But we're really hoping to get it back into the project. So those are the first two alternates.
In light of the bid results, are those two alternates something that we should discuss as a group at this point?
We certainly can discuss them. I still personally remain very steadfast that we should try and get these two alternates in. I really think that they are critical to the project, but of course this is open to discussion with this group.
Yep, and before we continue, let me just give you the other alternates, which are late in the project. They don't need to be done now. If we had anything left over the contingency, we would certainly cover them. But alternate 3 is the multi-purpose field irrigation system. Number 4 was the fencing around the multi-purpose field. All right, so I'll give you the prices too. It was just about $100,000 for the field irrigation system, $107,000 for the fencing around the multi-purpose field, $182,000 for the site furnishings, the raised flower beds, the boulders, the picnic tables. Alternate number 6 is the site furnishing grouping 2, which would be like the bleachers, the goals, down along that area. And alternate number 7 is the last phase 2 landscaping plantings. That was $186,000 or $187,000. So not being critical path to the building, it's very easy to get through and say, hey, we could take care of those at some other point or in the future. Critical path to the project would be building the building, which included the canopy and the UV lights for the HVAC system, making it a safe school.
And John, what's the breakdown on those two?
All right, the UV is 27,000 and 425 for the entry canopy. By the way, just so everybody knows, we're not voting on accepting any one particular bid at this point in time. Right, we're going to look for an indication from everybody so that we're all on the same page, knowing that we have the $2 million from mitigation funds, but we're not signing up for anything now. I want everybody to think about it because there's a number of there's some brilliant people on this board, and there's a number of options that we could do or that I don't know about that could save us money, or incentives from different corporations and companies that could kick back into that plus column. Rob?
John, I want to hear a little bit on the rationale for the different options with the reduction in contingency, because we started with the 5%. It seems like 3 million on a base of 70 is, about that 4.5% overage. So what's the confidence that leads to recommendations of reducing the contingency as a way to sort of manage a number?
Well, I believe that they want to, obviously, if you reduce the contingency, that gives you more money to put earmark for different things, right? At the end of a project, the FF&E usually comes out of the contingency, anything left over. So right now it's 950,000. With the way things are going right now, we know that's probably 2/3. So there's, that $50,000 more is going to have to come out of, or $500,000 more would be coming out of the FF&E. Would be coming out of the contingency. The contingency is there for, we know we have ledge where the building's being built. That's going to be considerable, probably 750 to $1 million. It's just my wild off the cuff guess. We know that all the other buildings that we've taken apart in Westwood on the deconstruction side are wrapped in tar and asbestos. So we have to save mitigation. We have to save funds for that, which that comes out of the contingency. We know that with change orders, there's probably going to be $1 million of change orders. Some of it will go in our favor, some of it will go the other way, but you have to allow for that contingency. And then you never know, like at the Wentworth Hall project, there was a gas tank, right? It used to be a gas station. It was actually in between the CVS parking lot and Wentworth, and they found that. They didn't find it during the construction of the CVS. We found it in the building of the Wentworth. So that also had to come out of the contingency fee. So that's why you really need a robust contingency fee plus any kind of unforeseen increases. How'd I do? Did I answer the question?
You did fine. You just, I guess, with the question that I've got for the group is at 5%, which was the original plan, and reality has shown that the contractor bids and the subs roll up to about 5% beyond what the original scope is. It seems like reducing that contingency on a go forward basis while reducing the delta on line 134 is really just increasing risk that we're going to need that money and we're going to need to come up with it later in the game. That's I guess my question. What leads us to a confidence that going to a 3.5% contingency will ultimately be reality? That's I guess the question that I've got.
Rob, this is Michelle. I think I'd echo that. And I think Brian walked us through some of the specifics on some of the sub numbers. You can see that a lot of these subs are coming in and they are not sure. They're carrying crazy contingencies, or we've got wide spreads in a couple of the areas. I think that tells us that people are not confident in the market and they're not confident in what the cost will be. And I think we've all seen it in the last few months and then some. So that just has to be at the forefront of our planning here, because we can't have the normal confidence that we would have in a project a year ago, even doing all the same steps. The world changed, and a lot of our contractors are not there yet.
I think maybe to address Rob's comment about that, why we're saying that, this is ultimately an eventually going to be a go or no-go decision. And so without the additional mitigation money, we would have told you that we believe in no-go. Like there's just not enough money. With the mitigation money, and we're struggling, we're trying to, this is the best of bad situations sort of thing. We're looking at scenarios that we think collectively that we could say confidently to the town, you can let a contract versus no-go, because that's the options we have here. It's a pretty binary choice. I mean, there are those options Brian laid out, but they're not, those carry risk too, those no-go decisions. So the 3.5, why we settled on that, which by the way, doesn't include that 500,000 of owner's contingency, which is essentially another, the construction contingency is intended for change orders. The owner contingency is intended for other soft cost overruns. So the total contingency is more like 3 million. But why we settled on that 3.5 as being acceptable is based on our experience on school projects. The change order rates, especially if you take out owner added items that the owner decides to add in, the change order history we've had has been less than 3% on average. And we haven't had on new construction in particular, them become, I don't know that many that have ever gone over 3%, but we can show you that. So the 3.5 we felt is, while not desirable, is within kind of the historical percentage of changes that we see that are not owner added changes. So obviously those would, we wouldn't be able to do them.
Right.
Well,
And
that's,
if I heard John correctly, or maybe it was Brian at the start, we've got what, 30 days to make a decision at this point?
30 business days, yeah.
30 business days. Okay. So if we have 30 business days and we are trying to creative problem solve the gap, I think we need to be looking at what is the full gap that we're trying to solve to see if this is a go, no go. Because if we don't do that, we take the risk and then we've got a problem later down the line. To me, that's a bigger problem than saying, how do we get to, the full gap that we've got currently in order to get this done. That's just, I don't like the idea of assuming a bunch of risk and then somewhere down the line needing to come back to the well again. That's the way I would think about approaching the next 30 days. But I'm open to other thoughts.
Right.
Hold on, Brian's got his hand up. Brian?
Well, I had two questions. One, do we have an assessment of the hazardous materials that need to be removed and an estimate for that? And also, I thought we had a pretty good assessment of the ledge and an estimate for ledge removal.
Yeah, so to clarify, Brian, we do have an assessment of the ledge. The site contractor and the general contractor are carrying the removal of the ledge up to an assessed, what we feel is a quantity that they're going to need to remove for the building. So that's included in the base bid. I think John is saying that, there's always risk associated with that you could have more than you think you have. We have unit prices that if the quantities go up or down, we either get a credit back or we, pay at a fixed unit price. And then also on the asbestos, we do have an assessment of the asbestos, including, it's common that some of the buildings of this age have that damp proofing around the foundation, and we have that included in the assessment that the contractor is carrying. Same thing, if we find it, they take it out. If there's less, we get a credit. If there's more, there's a unit cost. And on our last several school projects, we ended up getting a credit back at the end of the day because we didn't find as much or it at all. But again, that's something you're not necessarily going to know the full extent of until you actually do it. And you can poke holes now and put your best information out there. But we do have those covered in the base bid, I should say. But those are your two, in my opinion, those are your two biggest risk areas on the project, coming out of the ground, especially with ledge, and then obviously not to the end of the project with taking the building down and potentially, unaccounted for asbestos or some other material that's, trapped in a wall cavity or something like that, it's not unusual. Some of this, and to kind of circle back on John's question about the, reducing contingency and dovetailing what Tim said is, Historically, for what it's worth, I mean, our rates are actually, without owner stuff, is 2% or less, closer to 2 than 3. And it's still relevant because it's based on the cost of the work, right? It's the percentage of the cost of the work that you see. So given the current costs, this contingency is based on those current costs. So from our perspective, a contingency on projects is an area that you can manipulate to absorb, budget impacts like this. Obviously, you do take on some of that risk. There's a potential that we finish this project and don't spend over 2.5% contingency at all.
Yes,
Which would be
John.
which
That would
would
be
be
awesome,
great.
Brian.
And
Good
knock on wood, fingers crossed. But that's been our experience on school projects, especially MSBA projects. So part of the thinking is that you have a contingency of 3-something% to get started with, which could be greater than the contingency that you're going to use on this entire project. And then as we move through some of the work with the ledge, getting out of the ground, getting over those risks, and we're tracking and projecting contingency burn rates, you'll know, whether or not you're going to get home. And then I guess, is that discussion worse, to say, oh, we did our best to manage costs, we're going to need a $500,000 more, that a year out, versus getting all of that funding now. And to John's earlier question, I mean, the total amount that you're chasing, even with 2 million, is, if you want a full 5%, you need an additional $1 million. If you want 4.5%, you need an additional 700,000. If you want 4%, you need additional 300,000. So if we get started and are able to VE out or find some credits from contractors or something like that, $300,000, you could basically have a 4% for the project. So that's kind of those parallel tracks that we're talking about. We're just saying that 3.5% is what we would feel comfortable with moving forward, because historically these projects come in without owner changes around 2% contingency for the total project.
So,
Looks
I
like
mean,
Lyle-
it looks,
Sorry, John, looks like Lyle has his hand up.
oh, go ahead, Lyle, sorry.
I'm just curious about the historic contingency or change order amount. I agree on the 3% is typical, but this project really isn't typical. There's a lot of, the amount of ledge and the, geothermal system. I think there's a lot of, I don't think this is a typical project. I'm not sure if you have any data on, that would kind of connect the dots on geothermal and ledge.
Yeah, we've done some of the projects that are in that 2% do have geothermal associated with it. We're doing a project right now with ledge. I think we're through that. I can get that update on that. And obviously some of the projects we're quoting have other atypical things as far as number of phases, and I think all of them included demolition with, asbestos concerns. So that's kind of factored in as well. I think we have the same hygienist as majority of those projects.
As far as Brian?
UEC.
Who is it?
UEC, Amar.
Okay. Yeah, he's usually pretty conservative, so.
Yep.
Well, let's leave it at that.
Yeah, no, and Lyle, I would agree. I mean, the risks on this job that, are atypical is you could have an overage with the ledge. Geothermal does have its complexities to it. So the drilling of that would be relatively early in the project. So in the first 6 months of the project, I mean, we're crossing over 2 of the biggest risks on the project.
The other scenario that I know we probably don't want to entertain is some sort of enabling package. If we're in a go, no go situation, we could always, take on the site portion.
That may be complicated because right now we already bid the project, and then in order to do that, we effectively would have to rebid the project.
Right. Yeah, no doubt. We need to pre-qualify site contractors to do an enabling package. I know it's not an idea that anyone probably wants to entertain, but if we're in a go, no go situation, that's another way to take some of the risk off the table.
Lyle, this is Michelle. I think if you go down there, you go back to what Brian described as an option of having to rebid it, and there's a lot of risk with that option.
Well, the other, I mean, I know we talked briefly about the alternates, and I know we're not voting today, but it seems like maybe that canopy, I know Maya mentioned that it's critical to the project, but at 400,000 or 500,000, you know, that might be something that, again, under the circumstance of go, no go, that might be something we take another look at.
Right. So, I mean, the scenarios that we have are basically, oh, excuse me, sorry.
I just didn't see that as an option on the spreadsheet.
If we were working through this live, Lyle, I mean, we could zero that out, et cetera. So, I mean, option here with 3.5% contingency includes those two alternates, and you're within 29, you know, you're 29,000, you know, under budget, so to speak. Option with a 4%, you're within 340,000 of budget, and obviously those alternates are 450. So if you took them out with 4%, you'd be under budget. So it's easy to manipulate those options. I think that was kind of like the today was to kind of get a feel for, you know, the priorities of the committee of comfort level with contingency, comfort level with do we want alternates, non-alternates, and then obviously we saw a parallel paths going forward with potentially finding some additional, you know, if we find $300,000 in savings with contractors, which I'm fairly confident we could do. I mean, you have a 4% contingency and you get your full FF&E budget and the first two alternates. So that's kind of the way, you know, we're presenting this, is there are options on the table. It's just the comfort level of the committee, and obviously we will need to make a decision in the next 30 business days.
All right, so I know that we're a little,
Oh,
we're running
sorry,
a little
John.
long, but we
I know
got
we-
Nancy and
Yeah.
Rob. I'm not sure who was first.
And
Brian, were
Brian's
you
got his
first?
hand up.
Brian too.
I think I saw Nancy up first, so why don't we start with Nancy?
Yeah, I just, I'm on board with a bit of what Lyle said and up front. There are a lot, I'll put it in my words, I think there's a fair amount of risk as we sit here today with some of the ledge issues and we don't know the asbestos situation clearly until we get to the end of the project. I'm loath to reduce the 5% contingency today to think that way. I really think we have to look at the potential for other funding sources to close the $1.1 million gap. I really don't think adjusting the contingency is something we should do first. Got to see what we can do to close the delta there at 5% contingency. And not for nothing, but we saw the impact of both the high school project, the police station, where you don't get to the asbestos matter until late in the project. And with the high school, I said it with this group before, we ended up needing to go back to the town for $1 million. And it was largely because we had used up the contingency at the beginning of the project. You know, when we got to the end and we needed more for the mitigation of the asbestos, we didn't have the resources. And not a comfortable thing to have to do, but the town supported it. And the real issue was our contingency up front wasn't adequate. Now, other things have changed. Back then, we didn't have an owner's project manager like we do now. There wasn't as much control over the project, and that had a lot of change orders. And I think change orders became the nemesis of the high school project. And we had, unfortunately, a very bad GC and had to replace them through the process of going back to the insurer and doing so. But it's a lesson that I don't want us to forget, that it was the contingency that really at the end of the day was inadequate. So to look at that as the answer to closing the delta, I think is not a good answer. So I just want to be on record for that now.
Brian?
I was wondering if someone from the town could address the bond financing and the timing for this, because that's potentially another cost in the end to this project.
Well, Brian, it's a debt exemption. So whatever we borrow at, whatever the rate is that we settle on when we put a long-term bond on this, it's what it is. The taxpayers incur the cost. It's not that that was set at a finite amount. I mean, the whole dollar amount of what we borrow is, but what the interest rate is, it wasn't
Right.
preset.
Right, I was just looking at the reality of with rising interest rates, that's going to be a larger, cost to taxpayers. And if there's a
Yeah.
potential
Well, we
risk
did-
that we're also having to, ask for additional money for contingencies, possibly, that's another risk.
Yeah, but it's not going to come out of this. It's going to be incurred by the taxpayers, but we had an assumption as to what it would be when we went to the voters. And Chris Coleman or Rob, do either of you remember what Pam's assumption was? I want to say 3.5%. Does anybody recall?
We had assumptions originally at 4%. And then given the market, she sort of lowered she kept all of the numbers in the presentations, but was focusing more on the 2%.
Right. I remember
had
there being a 2 to 4% range that was
Okay.
presented.
Yeah. that
Right,
makes
we
sense.
kept all scenarios.
Yeah,
Right.
I do think that the rising interest rates would affect us if we were to delay the bid. And if we were to sort of say, we're not ready to accept a bid now, we want to wait 3 months or 6 months or a year. And I know that was, so I think that's where the rising interest rates might affect us. I'm not sure, and I know Pam is not on the call today. I'm not sure what the rates look like now. My guess, I think we were going to actually try and get this out in July to, so hopefully the rates wouldn't have gone too much up, particularly for municipal bonds. But I think that a delay would actually affect us more.
And I can respond to some of Nancy's concerns. I mean, one of the moving forward with a 5% contingency, I mean, obviously there's a chance that you would get close to maybe spending a full 5% contingency on this project. I think the risks that we feel are associated with that are more so in the beginning, because we feel pretty confident with the asbestos, given the track record and things of that nature. But that being said, when those funds would actually be needed and expended towards the end of the project, that $1 million gap between a 4% contingency and a 5%, just like if we started with a 5%, and the way it would happen with taxpayers is if we don't expend it, they don't borrow it, right? We don't use it. So historically, there is leftover money on these types of projects, but needing that contingency money, that extra $1 million, would be, in my opinion, it's going to be 18 months to 2 years from now where you'd actually, potentially need it. So then in that time is where you could either secure additional funding, or we'd able to, value engineer out some credits, so to speak, and still get the 5%. You might not necessarily need that day one. So that was some of the scenarios that we also talked through. What do you need for the first day? What do you need for the first 18 months of construction? Same thing with FF&E. You're not going to procure the FF&E necessarily until deeper into construction to actually let POs go and commit that. So you do have some time before you need those funds. But just from a timing perspective, that's how we would see the contingency actually being played out.
Brian, can it be done where, let's just say we go with the, that 1.1 million delta, and we need revenue sources to cover it, because we've said keep contingency at 5%, hypothetically. But that we manage the project as if we have a 3.5% contingency. In
Yes.
other words, we say we don't want to use, what did you say, for every 50 basis points? What is it?
For like $350,000, $350.
350. So if you worked as if it's 1.0 something million that you're not going to touch, even though you've budgeted 5%, you act as if it's 3.5%. So that you not hope, because my friend Rob Gotti says hope is not a good strategy. You
Hope is not a
plan.
plan.
You
You manage
plan
right.
as if you have the lesser amount of contingency. You work as if you have the lesser amount of contingency.
Yeah, you make
So at
decisions.
the end of
based
the
on that.
day, you don't have to go to this yet another revenue source to complete the project, but you get your furniture, but you get alternate 1 and 2. And then at the end, you can say, if we worked that way and we have $1.1 million of unused contingency, then we can look at alternates 3 through 7.
Right, and
So-
that's, and typically, that's our approach on every project, let
Yeah.
alone the ones that have a budget issue. I mean, we're working to keep that contingency use as low as possible.
Right.
Defer some decisions if possible, obviously give you enough lead time that if there is an opportunity to incorporate something later, that we're able to make that decision without incurring additional costs because it's too late. And that would be the approach from day one, obviously. And if you're able to secure additional funding to make up that 1 million, great. If you don't, then, we're working towards, a budget of 3.5% or 4%. There is still that risk, though, that you get that, for, lack of a better term, that awful change condition in the beginning with ledge out of something totally unforeseen that, it's unlikely, but it's still possible. And I guess that's even with 5%. I mean, I wouldn't see it going above 4% into 5% range, but I think that's the concern, is that there's a major risk in the beginning that could eat into that 3.5% that you're managing to rather quickly. But what I'm saying is, if we're managing it that way, and what we do in every project is, you will know the contingency exposure and burn rate, basically weekly, monthly, to understand where you're tracking. And then if something needs to be done with additional funding, you would know that well in advance, months, years in advance, so to speak, if we could, of needing additional funding.
So do we have an option to select, to click yes, we're going forward, to select the low bid with a $1.1 million shortfall?
Yes,
So we're not
because
asking, so let me just jump in for a second. This is a lot to digest, so we're asking everybody to digest.
I'm not
looking
saying we're
for a
voting
vote.
today, John. Yeah, I get
Okay.
that. I'm not saying we're voting today. It's just when we
So
vote.
ideally, we'd be looking at the 3.5%. If we were looking at it today, we'd be looking at the 3.5%, the $2 million in mitigation, which puts us 29,000 left. Now, hopefully, we're able to come up with sharpen the pencils and do whatever we need to do. And ideally, we'd like to finish off with the 5% and everything in column J.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
Nancy, I think to answer your question is, you have enough funding within the budget to award a contract.
Mhm.
And really the question becomes, if you secure the additional $2 million in funding, you have enough project budget to move forward with a 3.5% contingency and a full FF&E budget. So yes, you have enough funds currently to move forward with the project. It just becomes the appetite for that risk associated with that. But you do have enough money to award a construction contract and 3.5% contingency to award construction change orders, because every change order has the same process. You have to certify that the funds are available in order to execute it. So you'd have money to do that up to 3.5% to start.
But my question is, can we? Yeah, I really, what I'm trying to say is, can we have the 5% contingency, even though we don't have $1 million of necessary funds to back it up? But that may
So,
come with time.
yeah.
Because I'm not sure we can get an answer within 30 days.
So Nancy, that issue there is, that's strictly a town site accounting
Yep.
issue. And then
Yep.
so
Okay.
from the legal perspective, that you don't even need we don't even need the $2 million firmly committed to sign the contract, because there's sufficient amount of dollars in the authorization to cover the contract. And this is just we're just simply planning out, okay, but you need additional funding if you want to complete the contract the way you plan. And then so that in terms of the additional alternates and then potentially additional costs in terms of risk in the unknown. And what we, so it's perfectly reasonable for the committee to authorize the authorize the project to proceed, and then in the meantime, trying to firm up, I'm using the term, in terms of the commitment of the funding for that would not be needed until a little bit later in the project.
Thank you.
All right, Jen?
I think,
Yeah, I'm curious, the 30-day decision period that we're talking about, is that worked into the construction schedule? Like, if we sit on this and discuss for the next month, are we still looking at February 2024?
Yes, the goal is that we'd have the decision made in July and get the contractor going by the end of July, realistically.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, the sooner the better, but that is the current schedule. The schedule is tight for the February 2024, but the goal is to push the contractor to meet that date versus maybe giving them extra time unnecessarily to start. But the goal would be that they would start moving, especially with submittals and paperwork, and potentially mobilizing site fence and things like that in sometime in July, late July.
Which works well with our next meeting, which is July 13th.
That's right.
Oh, we're getting that one in right before the in-person
Yes, we are.
requirement kicks back in.
Yes. And hopefully by the fall that kicks back in as well, but August could very well be in person.
Oh, July 13th.
John, Lyle has his hand up.
Oh, sorry, Lyle?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, the bids are good for 30 days, right?
30 business days, yeah.
all right.
Lyle, you get another question?
No, I'm sorry, I gotta lower
Okay.
my hand.
So, conscious of time here.
Yeah.
Are there any final questions or thoughts on this today? This is definitely a continuing conversation. But if there's any final thoughts, raise your hand now.
Did we set the July 13th meeting a while ago?
Yes.
So the July
It's Zoom
13th,
5 o'clock.
yeah, we're switching from this was our last Friday, 8 a.m. meeting. We're now going to the Pbc Typical Schedule, which is the second Wednesday of every month at 5 p.m.
Which won't be recorded by Westwood Media Center.
I cannot be at that meeting, so I'm sorry. It just takes one vote
Okay.
away from the decision to go forward, which is, I don't think, a good thing. Or whatever the vote may be.
All right. But
We can work out logistics.
All right, should we move to action items?
Yep.
Okay, so first action item is the vote to approve the school building and permanent building committee meeting minutes of May 13th, 2022. John, I think we need separate votes for these, for meeting minutes.
Yeah, separate roll
So-
call vote.
Yep,
Same
so
minutes.
I'm gonna call the school building committee voting member roll. First of all, can I get a motion from the SBC to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Okay, is there any discussion? No, all right. Ken,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Lyle,
I wasn't actually at that meeting.
okay. John,
Yes.
Nancy,
Yes.
Chief Scoble,
Yes.
and I'm a yes. Motion is carried. John, you want to do PVC?
And from the PVC, do we need to make a motion on a second motion?
I think
Or
so,
can we
yeah.
go on the same?
I'll make a
May I
motion.
like-
Second.
All right. All those in favor, Ken,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Lyle?
Yeah, I wasn't on that call.
I know. All right. Nancy,
Yes.
Maya,
Yes.
Chief?
Yes.
Excellent. So it's one abstention and everybody else unanimous.
Excellent. Okay, next is a vote to approve the vendor invoice package for the period ending May 31st, 2022. The total amount is $499,269.10, and you can see the breakdown in your packets. Can I get a motion to approve these invoices?
So move.
Second,
Is there any discussion? Okay, I think I can call a joint one for this, right? Or John, do you call it?
I can call it that way.
All right.
So, Ken,
yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Lyle,
Yes.
Nancy,
Yes.
Maya,
Yes.
Chief,
Yes.
and I'm a yes. So that's unanimous.
Great. And I think the last two votes we're not holding today. So moving on to any new business. Is there any new business?
Can I just make a request? All this information is very, very important and valuable. And before the next meeting is held, that everybody do their very best to get information out at least 24 hours in advance. Ideally 48. And I know you guys are working so hard. So it's
Yeah.
just, these decisions are so significant. That I think we all need a chance to absorb and ask questions
Yep.
directly of people beforehand. I'm glad we're not taking a vote today, but we really shouldn't based on something we're seeing in real time.
So yeah,
Yeah,
this was
and-
less than 36 hours ago. Did it come in?
I
Yeah,
get,
and-
I'm
and
not being
this-
critical. I'm just making a really important request.
No, but
Yeah.
it's why we're not voting on it, because we
Yeah.
require 2 days to look at everything.
Yeah, we do. I think we do the best we can to get it out as soon as we can. School committee didn't have their meeting till last night. So we didn't know whether those 2 million would potentially be available. That would have factored in, but
Maya,
regardless.
when will you vote?
We're gonna look and try and schedule another meeting, definitely before the July vote for this group. So we just need to, we haven't calendared it yet. But we will. All right. Any other new business? Nope. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Nobody wants to leave, man.
No one wants to leave. It's such good news. All right, Ken,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Lyle,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Nancy,
Yes.
Chief,
Yes.
and I am a yes. We are adjourned.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.